Good morning. I'm Malcolm Young, Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Fall Forum season. What does God have to do with nuclear weapons? Nothing and everything. In his new book, God and Nuclear Weapons, Meditations at the End of the Atomic Age, Bishop William Swing offers an original meditation on the threat of annihilation and how faith offers a way to encounter the end of everything. If humanity stays on its present course, he proposes, a nuclear war is inevitable. While life teeters on the edge of extinction, this book offers the full biblical scope of hope in the face of that extinction. Bishop Swing, the 7th bishop of the Diocese of California and founder and President Emeritus of the United Religions Initiative, calls on readers and leaders to change course and raise our voices to press for a world free of nuclear weapons. Today, we're going to talk about the complex relationship between belief in a life-creating God and the reality of a life-denying nuclear arsenal. Bishop Swing, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Malcolm. Good to be here.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this very much. And I know that we could talk about nuclear weapons the whole time, but I thought it would be good to hear about some other things too. So I think that's part of what all of us want to hear, not just a kind of broad section of what you're up to. But I've been thinking we have a new bishop who just started in August. Bishop Austin Rios, and I was wondering just what your first impressions of California were. Just how the culture was, how you saw things being different from where you came from, and over time, just how has that picture looked for you?
Oh my, yeah. Back in 1979, I got a pamphlet or a package from Diocese of California. I was in Washington, D.C. My wife and I had just finished remodeling our house. Our children were in a wonderful youth group. I was 42 years old. Everything was so wonderful. And then this packet of information came from the Diocese of California saying, we have 171 candidates for bishop. And we're closing down the whole thing. And somebody put your name in. And so you could be 172 if you want to fill out the 19 pages. I said, the heck with that. I threw it in the garbage can. And Mary and I were talking at dinner, and I said, well, this thing came from California, and I threw it in the garbage can. She went over to the garbage can. She
fished it out.
She pulled it out, and she read it down at the bottom and said, if you're one of 24, we will fly you and your wife to San Francisco for an interview. And Mary said, fill it out. So I filled it out. And they said, you're one of 24. So they flew Mary and I to, they flew Mary and me to San Francisco. And I had the interview. We went down to, this is probably not good for the church, but we went down to Union Square, and we were going to take a red eye back to Washington, and it was winter time, and some people had cameras interviewing people in the park, and everybody in the park had prophylactics on their fingers. And I said,
that's
well,
pretty crazy.
And somebody was working on a sculpture, and I said, well, what's the name? What's going on here? And they said, well, it's a National Condom Week in San Francisco. And I said, really? We have national...
We don't celebrate that in Virginia.
No, we have National Secretaries Week in Washington. Is it anything like that? And they said, well, we're number 1 in syphilis in the nation, and we're number 3 in gonorrhea. And as a matter of fact, the guy is working on an ice sculpture of a gonorrhea germ.
Oh, wow.
And I said, oh, yeah, now that you mention it. Yeah, I get it now, yeah. So we got on the airplane, and Mary said, who wants to be the bishop of Sodom and Gomorrah? She said, if they tell you that you're one of 6, you got to say no. And I said, Mary, this is the weirdest place I've ever seen. I'm saying no matter what. So a phone call came on Friday afternoon. They said, you're one of 6. Will you stand for an election? I said, no, take my name off that list. That's the dumbest thing. And they said, well, can we call you back on Monday morning? And I said, sure. You can call me back on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so 3 things happened that weekend. Well, one is that I got a letter from Santa Clara, California, in some church there. And they said, we have 17 people who want to vote for you for bishop. And I thought, why would anybody vote for me? I don't know where Santa Clara is.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I finished the 9:15 service at church on Sunday morning, and I was going in to start the adult class, and I was walking through the hall, and one lady grabbed me. She grabbed me and she said, I have flown all night from California to say 3 words to you. And I said, what are those 3 words? And she said, don't back out.
Wow.
And then she turned around, walked off, and flew back to California.
Oh, my gosh.
So then the third thing, I had at 11 o'clock service, I had the baptism for Henry Kissinger's nephew. And Dr. Kissinger said, well, why don't you come over for lunch in Georgetown? So Mary and I trotted over to Georgetown. We had lunch, and I said, Dr. Kissinger, now that you're no longer the Secretary of State, what are you going to do with your life? And he said, and he said, Mr. Swing, what are you going to do the rest of your life? And I said, oh, California, they got some problems, and the bishops have some problems. And he dropped his fork on the plate, and he says, Mr. Swing, he says, you mean California Diocese has many problems, and you've had much success, and you will not be a candidate because you want your children in a youth group? He says, Mr. Swing, that is not responsible leadership.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that stunned Mary and me. So we walked out on the pavement in front of Kissinger's house and said, okay, more going on here than, I did not take it seriously. And then all of a sudden it was, okay, let's take it seriously. There are a lot of things going on here. So,
yeah, I mean, there's so many ways in which we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for that conversation. I mean, not just your episcopate, but just your commitment to bigger things like nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of your fondest memories of just being bishop? I mean, when you think back on the good times, what do they look like?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say what are the biggest challenges. I could go on and on.
Yeah, well, I have a list of that too. I mean, I felt like one of the things that you did that was absolutely amazing, which is it's not going to be written anywhere, but I did feel like there was just so much conflict between the different church leaders in the diocese. I mean, these cardinal rectors, in a world where there were hardly any women ordained, and they were so at odds with each other. And I felt like you created a very, like a mediating environment. You were a very unifying force.
Yeah. I had a vision of that. When I got here, the Diocese of California went from Novato down to Arroyo Grande.
Yeah.
And so I had to drive every day all over the miles and miles and miles. And I remember at the end of the first year, the standing committee brought me in and said, how's it going? And, being a tough guy from West Virginia, I said, it's going great. And then I began to cry.
Oh, yeah, right. I can imagine.
I just broke down and cried. It was killing me. I was thinking, I know why the last bishop got in trouble. I know why the bishop before him got in trouble. It's too much geography, too many clergy, too many parishes, too many issues. You cannot, it's going to wear you down. So we started the Diocese of El Camino Real. So that cut off half of it. And then I was only the bishop of the 5 counties of the Bay Area, which is a pretty good workout in itself. It kept me off the streets and busy. But when the last 2 bishops before me wore down, and they just wore out. And so when there's no episcopal leadership, then everybody heads to their own little power base. And so when I walked down, there were all these little bases. And I was thinking, oh, come on. I know how to run a big parish. Why don't we run a diocese like a parish? Bring it all together.
Yeah.
And so I said to the diocese, look, I've never been to California. I don't know the priests. I don't know I don't know the churches. I don't have any vision for what you guys ought to be. But I do believe that God has planted the seed of the future in your heart. So you know what you want to see the diocese become.
Yeah.
And so you got a dream in you. So you just tell me your dream, and I'll work to make it come true. So we had the dream of California, and I invited anybody who had a dream to put out the dream. And we got 10,000 dreams.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with those? So we put them into big categories, and then we went after them one at a time. And one thing about a dream, if a dream is authentic, it begins to happen as soon as it's expressed. I mean, they don't have to wait for me to get a committee to do this thing on communication. Once you say it, people coagulate around an idea and start to make it happen. So we got off to a roaring start with the Dream of California.
Yeah, what a great way to get things going. And then, I mean, so much was happening too. It's just with the AIDS crisis, with homelessness, which, you had to respond to. And,
one night I got a phone call from Diane Feinstein. It was about 1981. She said, we have this problem with homelessness this winter, and it won't last, said the mayor. Could you house some homeless at Grace Cathedral?
Yeah.
And I said, sure, we'll give it a try. So in this room, first night we had 50 people, and the second night we had 250 people. And then they broke into cars, and they had all kinds of paraphernalia on the streets, and the people said, look, we love you doing something on this regard, but not here, not on Nob Hill. So I had to find a place to house homeless, and I had to learn how to deal with homelessness. So I went to one of our institutions, Canon Kipp, and I fired the board of directors, and I fired the director, and it caused quite a stir. And I got a guy who came in my office, and he was a Navy submarine captain who had been under the North Pole for 6 months. And he just retired, and he said, put me to work. I said, have I got a job for you? Why don't you take Canon Kipp? And so we housed homeless 12 hours a day, and we ran programs for Filipinos and for other people for 12 hours. We were going 24 hours a day. We built a new facility, and then we built another facility, and we ended up having 11 facilities and housing 1,600 homeless every night and that sort of thing. So you just sort of stumble into it. You answer the phone and fire a few people and get kicked off Nob Hill, and all of a sudden you got a big industry going.
Yeah, Heidi's on the board of Episcopal Community Services. They do such good work, I'll tell you. The other things I think of San Francisco Towers. I think of the Bay School in a way is like a part of that dream too of an Episcopal high school. It just isn't Episcopal. It's got the Episcopal bones to it though when you're there. And then I think of United Religions Initiative too. It's just being
and with the AIDS, there was a guy on our staff who was 36 years old, and next door.
Yeah.
And he got this new disease, and I went to see him in the hospital, and he was wasting away. And this is just at the beginning of AIDS, and so when I watched him die, I visited him a lot. He was really a good guy, and they said, well, it's a gay disease or sarcoma, whatever. And I thought, well, whatever it is that he died from, I'm going to fight against that disease. And so I got the head of the American Foundation for AIDS Research to come to Grace Cathedral.
Yeah.
And we had the first religious conference in the world dealing with AIDS here. And we had 44 states of the Union, and we had 4 countries of the world. And we had a hotline, and we started a ministry down on Castro Street, and we started other ministries in hospitals, and on and on and on. And so that was years and years and years. And I'd go to a parish, and there'd be 30 people who had died in that parish of AIDS. And I'd go to another parish, and there'd be 40 people who had died of AIDS. And the suffering and the loss and the families, that it was so hard, and it never let up. It just day after day, week after week, death after death, that just went on and on and on and on and on. And we started a ministry at San Francisco General Hospital on the 2nd floor there, the AIDS unit too. And I became a member of the American Foundation for AIDS Research. And I remember at the worst part of the epidemic, we had a commercial on television which said, "We're in for the cure." Mm-hmm. And I loved that. Everybody's dying, all the suffering, but we're in for the cure. There's going to be another day, and we're going to get there. Mm-hmm. And I loved working with the virologists and the immunologists, and that led to all kinds of things.
Yeah.
George Bush was the president of the United States, and he didn't know what to do with AIDS. And he used to be a parishioner when I was the rector in Washington. And he'd say, "Bill, come to the White House and give me a briefing on AIDS. Tell me what the physicians in San Francisco are thinking, because I don't know." So I would get the leading AIDS physicians in San Francisco, and they'd come to my office, and we'd get a game plan for the nation. And I'd fly to Washington, and I'd go in the Oval Office, and there'd be Tony Fauci, young Tony, and there would be Everett Koop, the Surgeon General, and there'd be Burton Lee, the head of Sloan Kettering, and I'd lead off with a game plan for the nation, and those guys would critique it, and George would write all kinds of things down. And so that led to a whole lot of other things. I'll tell you a silly thing. I saw him one time, and he said, "Bill, when are you coming to the White House?" And I said, "Well, I'll be there in a couple of weeks." And he said, "Where are you staying?" And I said, "At the Marriott Hotel on 19th or 17th, whatever." And he said, "Don't stay there." He said, "Stay at my house." And I said, "George, I cannot stay at your house." And he said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Because if I did and my wife Mary didn't, she'd kill me." And he said, "Bring Mary." And I said, "Oh, great." And I said, "Not only I'll bring Mary, I'll bring my golf clubs." And he said, "Well, wait a minute. You're going to bring your golf clubs. Let's don't stay at my house. Let's go to Camp David and play golf for the weekend."
Right.
So we got in helicopter one, and it was Camp David. It's so silly. I mean, what am I doing at Camp David? And we got into golf cart one, and
Golf cart one? I didn't even know there was such a thing.
There's the golf cart one, and I was there. And
at the controls of golf cart one.
Right. And he said, "Come on up for drinks and dinner." And so it was 6:30, and I said, "Mary, it's time for us to go up." And she said, I'm working on my hair." I said, "Mary, it's the President of the United States." And she said, "Bill, it's my hair." So I said, "Okay, I'm going up. Come up when your hair is done." So I went up, and he said, "Look, I'm in the middle of a crisis right now." Eisenhower built a little golf hole up on top of Camp David, and there are different places you could tee off, and there are balls and there are clubs, and you just go up, and I'll be up in a minute. So I went up, and it was a lonely spot up there, and it was 135 yards, and there was an 8-iron, and I can hit it that far. So I put the ball down, and I hit it, and it went over the trap on the green, and a voice from the woods said, "Good shot."
That's great, the Secret Service.
And I said, "Who's there?" He said, "Secret Service."
Oh, that's good.
You're never alone at Camp David.
Never alone.
When you're in the shower, you're kind of looking around.
Well, I just remember those days too, just, how much opposition you were receiving from, other parts of the Christian world. And I just remember you saying, your sons have come to California because you wouldn't accept them in your own homes. And here we are taking care of your children as they're dying. And I just remember, what a tough time that was.
Yeah, that was a big deal. I would end up in South Carolina talking about the disease, talking about gay, lesbian. I'd be in England. I would be, in India, wherever. And what I could do is to say this. I would say, if you have a child and the child comes to you and says, "I'm gay or lesbian or whatever," do you want your child never to be loved like you have been loved? Would you like your child never to have intimacy with another person over time? Or would you rather have your child be isolated forever? What would you do with your child? And that's the question the church has to answer, and that's the question families have to answer. And so, we could argue about this or that, but on that argument, on that line of reasoning, there wasn't a lot of pushback on that.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I came here, I'd never thought about the issue. I'd lived in dairy towns, pottery towns, steel towns, government towns. I'd never been in a place where the homosexual issues were right there. So I thought, well, if I'm invincibly ignorant about this, I'll learn. So I hired a place on Castro Street, and I went down every Tuesday night. And I would say, "Tell me about being gay. Tell me about when did you think you were? When did you know you were? What do you aspire to? What do you want? What do you want the church to do for you?" And so I listened night after night, week after week, till I got my brain around what was going on. So once I was finished with that, I knew where I stood, and I knew that most of the church didn't stand where I was.
Yeah.
And so then you have to say, do you just get into a big fight with the church, or did you just wear them down? Do you just keep going into the argument until we find a new day? So that was it, to find a new day.
Yeah, exactly.
And we won.
Right. It was the beginning of the new day. And what a blessing it is. I'm so grateful for that work of the church. I'm grateful for the church's courage in changing and for the new church that's emerged.
Yeah.
We have a new bishop. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what are the difficulties of being a bishop, and then what advice you might have for future bishops. So I'm not saying for this particular bishop, but future bishops of the Diocese of California.
One of the things when you're a parish priest, and it's Christmas Eve, and you know everybody, and they know you.
Yeah.
And you love them, they love you. You married them, you buried them, you baptized them, you've been in their house in crisis, and on Christmas Eve service, and you see everybody, and everybody's hugging, and it's so lovely. And the first year I was a bishop of California, and the service is over, and you just walk back into the dark to get rid of your vestments. And they didn't know you, you didn't know them. It was really lonely.
But our daughter said, it's almost like being homeless because you don't have a home church. Every week you're in a different place.
Yeah. Sunday morning was always like a family reunion, and then you're a bishop and you go to a different place and a different place. And what does your wife do? What do your children do? And where do they find their place? And then you have a place, because every year the bishop for a whole lot of people, but they're not the bishop's family for a whole lot of people. They got to find their own way. So, and then we couldn't do church together. You know, it wasn't a family church anymore. It was you go your way, I'll go mine. And you know, it took me 2 years to go around to every church. And I'd have a service and go to the coffee hour, and somebody would say to me, do you know who I am? And I would say, that's not the question. The question is, do you know who you are?
Yeah, I like
They'd
that.
say, really?
How spiritual.
But you don't have a, you know, when you first asked the question, I was thinking, Mike Hansen was my executive director, or executive officer, and he was, he and I were like Batman and Robin. We had such a good time together, and we sort of saw things through the same perspective, and he bailed me out of a lot of problems and made a lot of things happen for me. But we had so many laughs. I mean, he was a soul brother. I really enjoyed being with Michael.
He was. I always felt like he was like that for me, like the big brother. You were never like that, but for him, he was like kind of like my big brother. He'd kind of tease me about things, in the only way that like a big brother can tease you, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember you were in, I don't know, you were in Europe or something for his funeral, and I remember I read your sermon at his funeral, and I wish you could have been there to see that. I mean, obviously you couldn't, because if you'd been there, you'd have read the sermon yourself. But it was a very powerful moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are some good days for sure. And then I remember URI talk. I was getting started, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just how that was. It's funny because now that we're in this conversation, I'm having ideas that I never had before. But you know, you're so involved in AIDS in a national level, so involved in homelessness here in the city, so involved, like I said, in things like San Francisco Towers, the Episcopal high schools, et cetera. But all those things, in a way, were kind of preparing you to be even more effective in URI.
Yeah. One day I was sitting in my office, it was February 1993, and the phone rang, and it was the United Nations. And it was Jillian Sorensen. How's that for a memory?
Yeah.
And she said, the United Nations is going to have its 50th anniversary. And if the charter for the United Nations was written in San Francisco, and it was signed in San Francisco. So we want to come back to San Francisco for the 50th anniversary, and we'd like to come to Grace Cathedral and have a big service. Is that okay? And I said, sure,
Definitely,
we'd be honored.
Yeah.
And they said, well, our vision of the service is we'd like to have all the nations of the world there. We'd like to have 185 ambassadors of 185 nations. I said, that's great. And we, at the same time, we'd like to have all the religions of the world. And I said, that's great. And they said, we'd like you to bring all the religions of the world together for that service.
Yeah. Let me get out my Rolodex.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not doing anything this afternoon. Maybe I'll make a few phone calls, and let me get back to you on that. Yeah. And so, stupidly, I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And so I went to bed that night, and I was lying there, and it was February, it's cold and rainy. And I thought, what did I just say yes to? This is crazy. And then I thought, wait a minute. All the nations of the world, and all the religions of the world, and all the nations of the world have met together every day for 50 years to struggle together for global good. And in the same 50 years, the religions of the world haven't spoken to each other for 1 minute.
And have avoided each other and are undermining everything that the political leaders are doing.
That's right. That's right. And I thought, oh, my lands, if there is a United Nations, there's got to be a United Religions someday. I don't know how. I never studied other religions. I didn't know how you'd get there. I didn't know what it would look like. I didn't have any money. But I committed the rest of my life to God to be a catalyst for the creation of a united religions. So Mary and I got in a airplane and we flew over to see the Pope and the Dalai Lama and Mother Teresa and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Shankaracharya of Kanchipuram and the Grand Mufti of Egypt and the Sheikh of Al-Azhar and on and on and on and on. And I said to each one of them, are you willing to get a deputy from your tradition to meet with deputies from other traditions to pursue peace among religions? And they said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, this is not going to happen with the religious leaders. But then, what if we got grassroots people? They're unencumbered. They can move. They have some flexibility. The guys who are running the religions, they don't have any flexibility. They're stuck at the top of a pyramid, defending the faith of the people underneath the pyramid. They don't have any latitude or very little latitude, because if they acted like other people were as good as they were, you would betray your following. Mm-hmm. So you have to hold on to your superiority, your spiritual superiority, and give a little bit. But grassroots people, they're mobile. They can get together. So how do you do that? And so I went to a bank and got $1 million line of credit on my name.
Yeah, wow.
If you ever think of why banks go under, any bank that would give me $1 million.
First Republic, was it First Republic?
No, I don't want to get in. This is not a commercial. So I got $1 million. I hired 4 people. We had started doing interfaith conferences around the world, and we got all these wonderful people. We brought them to Stanford in the summer, and we became a global community of faiths, but we couldn't write a charter. And so a lady who goes to Grace Cathedral lives across the street. She said, I know a guy named D. Hawk. Why don't you sit with him? And it turned out so we went across the street from the cathedral. And D. Hawk was there, and he was the guy who created Visa card.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, D, what you did with banks could I do with religions? And he said, yep, but you'll have to sit in a room with me for 3 years. Yeah. And I said, I'm a working man. I can't sit in a room with you for 3 years. He says, the only way it's going to get done. So 18 of us sat down in the Presidio. Every 6 weeks, we had 3 days out of our lives, and we hunkered it down on the job, and we came up with a charter, an organizational design, on and on and on and on and on, a purpose, a principle, a preamble, et cetera. So, and then in the year 2000, we signed our charter of the United Religions Initiative. And today we're in 112 countries. We have offices all over the world, and we impact millions and millions and millions of people.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. And in a way, again, it's just kind of building on to what our topic is for today, which is nuclear weapons. You know, you and George Schulz were friends. When George was here, he was on the forum a few times. We talked about his work on protecting the ozone layer and what that took, and that being kind of preparatory for the later work that he was doing in nuclear weapons dearmament. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your relationship and just how he inspired you in terms of your work on nuclear weapons.
Yeah, when I was the bishop, I did work on nuclear weapons here at Grace Cathedral. Mm. I brought the Secretary of State, I brought George McBundy, I brought Sidney Drell, the great physicist, and we had big nights on nuclear weapons here at the cathedral. But time went by, and I was working on other projects. And then George Schulz invited me to Stanford University, and he had brought in people from Russia, nuclear experts from around the world, writers, scientists, and they were all downstairs, and I was upstairs in the balcony with a few people just taking notes, learning what they were talking about. And all these experts spent 2 days, and they were ready to go home, and George looked up in the balcony and he said, "Bill, what do you think?" What do I think? I'm just taking notes. And so I said something just to get out of there. And so
whenever I take notes, by the way, I take notes on the left hand is what's happening in the meeting, and on the right hand is what I'm going to say if anybody asks me. So I'm ready. But yeah, I can imagine.
That's good. That's great.
But then you had a chance to think a little bit more about it.
Yeah, George died. I buried him in Western Massachusetts, and Charlotte died, and I placed her ashes under the Golden Gate Bridge while the cannons of the water cannons went off on an evening in San Francisco. And when I was writing this book, I didn't start out to write this book. I wanted to write a book, honestly, about the Gospel of Mark. And I did a lot. I did about 2 years of preparation for that book. And then I began to give speeches about nuclear weapons around, and then I thought, people are listening. Maybe I ought to take the theology that I'm talking about and the nuclear issue that I'm talking about and put them together. And then I thought, well, what if I put George Schulz in there also? So there'd be 3 layers to this. There'd be the George Schulz layer, the scope of theology, which goes from the doctrine of creation, the doctrine of the fall, the doctrine of redemption, the doctrine of the Spirit, the gathering, and the doctrine of the end. And what if you took the sweep of theology and took a look at nuclear weapons? How would that stack up? And then I began to think, all these guys who are getting us to the end of the world, do they have anything to say about the end? They have a lot to say about how we're going to blow up everybody and all the species. But okay, and then what?
Yeah.
Then where are we as a planet? What does this mean? And then it gets to be a very godly. And then you think about the liturgy upstairs.
Yeah.
It's all about bring it on.
Yeah.
Bring on the second coming. Bring on the end of the world. Bring on the return of the Messiah. Bring on even the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Our vision is not to get away from the world, but for heaven to impregnate earth and to have a whole new earth. And Jesus says, it all boils down to you have a little seed, you put it in the ground, it has to die. And if it dies, then you can have life. Well, what does that mean if you're talking about life, human life and species life on this earth? Is that a seed that goes into the earth and dies? And then what comes? You can't get around the crucifixion. You can't get away from the death. And so a lot of the people who get us to this point don't have a thought about what happens at there's a crucifixion, then what?
Yeah.
So the book is about that.
Yeah, there's that article in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, saying that we're spending $1.5 trillion to renew our nuclear arsenal. That's $57 billion a year. It's $108,000 a minute for the next 30 years. It's such a massive undertaking, and yet it's kind of happening invisible to most Americans. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just why Americans don't know about this, why Americans don't seem to be to care more about this. Why aren't we talking about nuclear weapons when we're talking about the political process, for instance?
Yeah, you're going to love my sermon.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I can't wait.
It's all about it. It's
all I can think about the last, obviously I've been reading your book, so I've been spending the last 2 weeks just.
A couple of summers ago, I talked to 350 people, and in the talk, I said, and these were Jews, Muslim, Christians. These are religiously active lay people. And I said, now, please hold your hand if in your religion, in the last 10 years, have you heard one sermon on nuclear weapons? Please raise your hand. Not one person raised their hand. What in the world is going on when the threat to the, we're spending money to end the world. The threat is there, and preachers don't preach about it.
Yeah.
And religious curriculum doesn't teach about it. And nobody wants to talk about it. There's an agreement of silence that it's unfathomable, but it's there. It's real.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I fundamentally don't understand. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the things about, it's hard for people to think that the world isn't going to exist. And I'm one of those people. By the way, I came into the faith because of thinking like that. I remember when I was an acolyte, how much time we got? I was playing football on a vacant lot in Huntington, West Virginia, and it began to snow and rain, and we were covered in slop. And the parish, there was next door, this lot was owned by the Episcopal Church, and the priest came out and says, "You boys don't want to play in the slop. Come on in, I've got a ping pong table." So I went in and played ping pong. And then he said, "Now, boys, Christmas is coming. How many of you boys would like to wear a uniform and light candles?" And I said,
"Count me in.
I'm there." That's when I became an Episcopalian, a Christian, the whole thing. It's right there. And I was an acolyte, maybe 10 years old, and he preached a sermon, Edward Miles Blum, and he said, "Now, I want you to imagine." Okay. He said, I want you to imagine when there was no Huntington, West Virginia. Okay. I want you to imagine when there was no Ohio River. Okay, I'm there. When there were no mountains, or hills. Okay, I'm there. I want you to imagine when there was no United States of America, when there was no Atlantic Ocean, when there was no world, when there were no stars, there was no moon, there was nothing. There was only God. And he had me.
Yeah. Jonathan Edwards as Jonathan Edwards, the Puritan from the 18th century, writes about, he says, one of the things he says is, the idea of absolute nothing is impossible for us to think. And then he says, it's like what sleeping rocks dream. Isn't that wild? That's what nothingness is.
But 2 summers ago, some not professor, but assistant professor, Cal Poly, was looking up and he saw a star that had run out of gas, was running out of gas, and there was a planet on its orbit, and the planet got out of its orbit a little bit, and the star ate it. the star ate the planet, and all of a sudden the star had the new gases and energy that it needs to stay alive. And the scientist was saying that probably is going to happen to Mars and Venus.
Yeah.
It could happen to the Earth. And so, wait a minute, that could happen to the Earth. No Earth. Then you think, what about extinctions? There are, somebody wrote a famous book about 5 extinctions.
Yeah, right. I read that book. It was great.
And, the meteor came in at 5 million times the speed of light or something and hit the Earth, and the smoke, the clouds went up and blocked off the sun, and almost everything died. And then the Earth sustained itself. Yeah. And the thesis was that it re-sustained itself stronger than it was before. That was the end of the dinosaurs. But, there are 2 things we're looking at here. One is, okay, what if we blow ourselves and our species up, and this is the 6th phase of that? Or what if there's nothing? What if we're just a barren planet orbiting around? There are more than 11 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way. And we're just this little thing that temporarily has all this green and all this blue and all this life and all this, and we're making the weapons to demolish all of it. And it's just so evil.
Yeah. On page 51, you talk about the nations that have voluntarily given up their nuclear arsenals. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about their experience and about what may make it possible for other nations to renounce nuclear weapons.
Yeah. South Africa would be the big example of that.
Yeah.
They invested heavily, and then they saw the costs, and they also saw the dangers. The plutonium, the uranium, the mines,
workers who have to handle the material, the waste that's left over.
Yeah. And looking at all that and saying financially it's not worth it, morally it's not worth it. I mean, if you're down in South Africa, who are you going to get into a fight with where nuclear weapons are needed?
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of common sense. And the 2 people who had common sense, who ever got into this, were Gorbachev and Reagan. And both of them were from farm areas and thought like farmers. And there was a time we went from 1 atomic bomb to 2 atomic bombs to 70,000 atomic bombs in a very short period of time. And Reagan and Gorbachev said, this is nuts. 2 farm boys, you can't sustain a farm like this. Something's going to blow. So they met in Reykjavik, Iceland, and they said, okay, this is unsustainable. It's going to kill the world. Let's go from 70,000 warheads to 60. Let's go to 50, okay? Let's go to 40, okay? Let's get rid of all the nuclear weapons. It was on the table, and the 2 guys who had them all were there. And that was the one moment in history, modern history, where we could have gotten rid of nuclear weapons, theoretically. And Gorbachev said, I can't sell it back home. And Reagan said, I can't do it without Star Wars shield. And so they quit on the numbers. But they started having Russian scientists talk to American scientists and doctors and et cetera. So we had a whole universe of Russian and American people talking to each other about how many do you have, where are they, how lethal are they, what do you do for your protection of your workers, et cetera, et cetera. And after Reykjavik, the world got a lot safer. And then we did go down from 70,000 warheads, and now we're down to 13,000 warheads.
Yeah.
So it's not like nothing has happened. A lot's happened. But we're at a pregnant moment where if Ukraine is used as a place for tactical nuclear weapons, and then Europe or the United States and Europe has to respond, then you go from tactical to strategic, and when it's strategic, then it's all over in about 30 minutes. It's not a matter of what are we going to do tomorrow in our war. The war is over in 30 minutes once it gets to the nuclear war. That's how long it takes for the submarines to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and for the silos to open up and go, and for the airplanes to be on alert to go. So there's so many conversations now that have to be made, and they're not happening. A few are happening because and there are some diplomats who haven't given up. There's some scientists who know it's insane. But
are there particular leaders other than yourself or George Schulz? Who are the leaders in terms of politicians who are talking about this issue, or other world leaders? Like who's leading the charge on this?
Yeah, Senator Markey in Massachusetts is great on that. Senator Nunn used to be great on that. Archbishop Wester, John Wester down in New Mexico, he was great on that. He used to be a San Francisco Roman Catholic bishop.
Oh, that's great.
He's really good on this subject. But the people whose voices are being raised are people on the edges. They're not the people in the center.
Yeah.
Obama, when he was president, he said, we got to get rid of these, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize. And then after he said, well, not in my lifetime.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Not in my lifetime, but I hope in the future we'll get rid of these.
Yeah.
You're the most important
person to believe in this.
In the world.
In the world, exactly.
And you back off.
Well, it's funny. I mean, now we're heading into an election, and there's definitely people talking about just the procedures to have one person determine whether the United States nuclear arsenal is launched, whether or not we're attacked. So there are people who are saying, we need a different process for making launches. So maybe one person could launch all the weapons if we are actually being attacked, but if we're responding to another, if we're not responding to another attack, if this is the first strike, then it may need a different process. Are you part of those conversations, or do you have anything to say about?
There are people like Back from the Brink and Plowshares in San Francisco is great on this subject. I've seen the list of all the nurses against nuclear weapons, physicians against nuclear weapons, scientists against nuclear weapons. It's not like there's nobody out there.
Yeah.
There are tons of people out there working. But then what you're talking about is that when you get into the military, deep into the military, you get deep into the politics, you get deep into the industrial military complex that's making a lot of money off this.
Yeah.
Somebody's making a lot of money on it because the money's going someplace.
Yeah, $1.5 trillion over 30 years.
So you can imagine the lobbying that is on their behalf. And you can imagine the politicians who need the money from the law, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a conspiracy of everybody's bought off that it's going to keep going, it's going to keep going. And then the question would be, what's going to be the game changer? Senator Markey says, we ought to sign a thing that says no first use. America's not going to have the first use. We won't sign that. Then you say, well, let's say that we don't let the President of the United States make the decision quickly by himself, herself, without, can we put some lag time?
Yeah, committee, or lag time.
Can we put lag time in there? And, the data is going to come so fast. If the whole world's going to be over in 30 minutes, you don't have a lot of time to chat about this. So how do you build a fail-safe process? One thing is that you got to have an ironclad. We're going to go from 70 to 13 to none. You got to be ironclad about that, and the issue is not just what do we do in the meantime, but to get rid of them. Or, failing that, how many do you need?
Yeah.
How many do you need to protect yourself from one enemy or some? And we've had some, in the book, we've had some moments where the President of the United States wanted to, who ordered the people in the Oval Office to bomb, use the atomic bomb, and the President was drunk.
Yeah.
And his aide said, "Well, wait till he sobers up in the morning, and we'll figure out whether to bomb that nation or not." It all hangs on a thread of a president or the guy in North Korea or Putin or whatever.
Do you know anything more about China's nuclear capabilities? Because that does kind of change the equation. I don't think you talked very much about it in the book, but I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
You're a good interviewer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You read the literature and you think about it. I'm impressed by you.
Thanks, Bill.
I'm coming back.
When I was 27 years old, I was in your office and we were having a conversation. Everything that happened then, I recorded perfectly. I have a total recall memory of these things. Wow. And one day, as you said, you know what? One day, Malcolm, you might be like the Bishop of California or the Dean of Grace Cathedral. And I was like, that is crazy. But here we are.
It did seem crazy.
It did. It's like, what are you talking about? But China.
You're talking about China. And, Israel has some bombs. France, let me, over to the side just for a second. Because things are escalating in Russia, one guy who's in charge of these conversations has said we need to get the heads of England, France, China, Russia, and America, those five, because they have the bombs.
Yeah.
Let's get them together because things are getting precarious now. Up to now, we haven't had the conversation. It was the best news I've seen. Was the Russian is trying to get the five countries together to talk. North Korea has a small amount. Israel has a small amount. They're not, and India has some, Pakistan has some, but they're not. They have enough to destroy India,
right,
and Pakistan, but they don't have enough to finish the world. But those five together could finish the world. And so those conversations, I hope, pray, happen, are on the way. But China, the bad news about China and nuclear weapons is that they want to take their submarine fleet and expand it considerably. There are three ways. you launch a nuclear weapon on a submarine, or from a silo on the ground, or from an airplane. And they're not big on airplanes and silos, but they're big on submarines. And they're getting to the point of almost rivaling America and Russia. So America and Russia are taking notice of their intentions. The one thing that's good about the Chinese is that they're ready to sign no first use. They keep saying, can all of us just agree that okay, we'll build them as long as we understand that nobody's going to use them first.
Yeah.
But propaganda is propaganda. You don't know what's what.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's one story in there. I don't know if you got time.
We have time for one more story.
Okay. There's one General James Mattis is a friend, and he was head of our troops in Iraq, and the last president invited him to be on the in the cabinet as the Secretary of Defense, and James Mattis was at the table in the Oval Office with all the folks, and they started talking about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You bomb this, we bomb that, they go that, how much time we got, what's happening, what's the fallout, where do we... And when the conversation was over, Jim got into a car, drove up the hill to the National Cathedral, went to Bethlehem Chapel, knelt down and prayed. He's a hardened Marine, and he's seen it all. And when you see it all and your eyes are opened to what the situation really is, you get down on your knees and you pray.
Yeah, it's just what we all need to be doing. Please join us on November 3rd when our guest will be Patrick Makukane, who's our artist in residence. We'll be talking about the Year of Memory and inviting the divinity of hula into the cathedral space. So he's a native Hawaiian hula kumu. You're always welcome to join us upstairs for Choral Eucharist at 11 o'clock, and we're so blessed to hear a sermon on nuclear weapons, I hope. But anyway, Bill will be our preacher today. I encourage you to get a copy of his book, which is on the back table, God and Nuclear Weapons. We also rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, THINK, to 76278. So that's THINK to 76278. Bishop Swain, what a blessing it is to have you. Thank you so much for your work and for sharing us.
Thank you.